In gachas, it never hurts to have options, and variety helps prevent the stagnation from playing the same old characters. You aren't made of money, so that's where 4-star characters come in to ease some of those pains. Many gachas periodically release lower ranked characters to fill out the rosters in between their higher ranked releases, and the better of those gachas will even drop viable low rank alternatives for their superior counterparts. However, Wuthering Waves seems to have a bit of a 4-star drought, and the player base is thirsting for a drop. I'm Forte, and let's talk about WUA's 4-star problem. Wuthering Waves has no shortage of fun and cool characters, like a mecha ghost girl, a lady that turns into a bigger lady, a baddie. And all of this is fine and good until you realize that the overwhelming majority of the roster is 5-star characters, and Kuro seemingly isn't in a rush to give us 4-star characters since we've only gotten 2 new ones in nearly 2 years. I have a few gripes with this, starting with the fact that many of the 4-star characters we do have are legitimately fun to play or have interesting concepts that could be expanded on. Personally, in some other gachas, I've had more fun trying to make lower ranked characters work than I've had playing some higher ranked ones. For example, back in my Epic 7 days, the game featured powerful 4-stars that could carry you through the harder PvE content and, if your opponent wasn't ready, could decimate teams in PvP. I spent an ungodly amount of hours building 4-stars for these reasons, and it never got old seeing them tear through whatever the obstacle was. This guy might be completely nerfed now, I don't know, but any OG Epic 7 player knows just how much of a nuisance this guy could be. Generally, I found a lot of 4-stars to be more interesting kit-wise, and that's probably because devs feel that they can afford to be a little crazier and loose with designing them. In WUA, a couple of my favorites are Sanwa and Alto. Sanwa's gameplay revolves around her putting down her icicles and using this fun timing-based bar to blink around and detonate her ice. It's so simple, but it's such a cool concept. For Alto, his fighting style has him playing around his wind walls, which enhances his attacks and his dashes. He also leaves around these shadow clones that distract enemies, which is a neat bonus. And don't even get me started on our crazy ass dungeon mains. To be clear, I do think most 5-star kits are worth diving into, but I think for 4-stars, despite their simple by today's standard kits, they're pretty engaging to play. In a similar vein, gachas that release more 4-stars have more opportunities to experiment and push these interesting concepts further. And I have a problem with the fact that we aren't being given the chance to try out different mechanics and team comps. The current cadence that Kuro introduces mechanics such as Fusion Burst, Toon Break, etc. vastly outpaces the introduction of 4-stars, so players are typically left with incomplete teams for a long stretch, hoping that another character comes along and fills the role of a third teammate. The poster child of how this particular issue can affect the roster is Chisa. Even in her most quote-unquote complete team with Cardi and Chiakona, her value is undercut by Arrow Rover, so she has yet to find a full team that can fully appreciate her buffs to negative status effects. This would be completely avoided if we had a Fusion Burst 4-star to complete her Amyth team to tide us over until the eventual 5-star Fusion Burst character, or maybe even a Spectro Frazzle 4-star for a Chisa Phoebe team. The missed opportunities to experiment with fun kits or potential mechanics is one thing, but the most unforgivable offense that the lack of 4-star creates is the fact that it directly forces free-to-play players and spenders alike to either run mismatched teams for who knows how long, or to swipe their cards. The greatest benefit that comes from a gacha that's been regularly updated with lower ranked characters is that the fleshed out roster gives players opportunities to save pools by providing alternatives to the premium options. Once this video goes up, we'll be a couple of patches away from Denia, who will be the Fusion Burst sub DPS for the Amyth Chisa team. This is great news for Chisa players, but this will have been around 6 months since the character first released, and she's truly had a complete team. This may not be an issue for everyone, but for free-to-play players who pool for any part of this team will be locked into pooling for the rest of it without any real options for an alternative. And as someone that speaks to value for free-to-play, this feels icky to say the least, and extremely predatory at most. While I do understand the necessity to incentivize pooling for new characters, providing players with a free-to-play friendly option to interact with new mechanics and characters feels like a reasonable ask. All this said, Kuro's saving grace is that Wuthering Waves is relatively generous when it comes to pools per patch, and since most people have or are planning on having Shorekeeper, pairing her with a newer DPS should be enough to brute force your way through most early, mid, and some early in-game content. But the almost non-existent drip feed of 4-star characters is something to keep eyes on as Kuro introduces more mechanics and characters. Though of course I'll be there to sound the alarms if it looks like things are getting dire. After all, that's what I'm here for. Until then, don't forget to like, dislike, or subscribe if you want more content like this in your feed. Also, if you have a particular low rank character that carried your account in any gacha, show them some love in the comments. This has been Pity Forte, and I'm out.